Northern Journey is described by its developers being a Norwegian happysad game. At first I thought this might be a joke term, like from the same hole that Hope Punk slithered out of, but this really is how the dev describes his game, and it's accurate. Northern Journey has fantastic, inspiring sights to show you, and some nightmares along the way. It's also all from the mind of a true solo developer, and in the credits, he thanks his friends and family. And this isn't a half-hour jog, it's a proper journey complete with combat, puzzles, and everything else. Considering that, the ambition and scale of it all is insane. It still has many signs of being a solo project, but it gets so much right and comes with an incredible atmosphere. I don't want to spoil too much of the journey, and luckily, the story is very straightforward. You're traveling through misty fjords to lands unknown, and you've become lost. It's going alright until some kind of mystical Chris Kyle punches holes in your boats from the cliffside. You barely make it to shore before sinking and are now trapped in wherever this is. After a short walk, you meet a traveling flute player who finds it extremely convenient you're now trapped here. They'll help you escape if you retrieve some lost items. You can search the nearby village for clues, and this is the first taste of how things will be. The first person you meet is a creepy village idiot who's tied up some kind of worm monster that the sheriff's dog is trying to kill. And if you go to the sheriff, he's preoccupied with the actual demon in his little jail cell. I think it's safe to say there's something off and strange about everyone in town. The conversations are one-sided, so it's not nearly as in-depth, but it does remind me of Pathologic. It definitely feels in that neighborhood graphically and surreally, and there is that sense there's an order to things here you can't understand. But unlike Pathologic, you're not here to fully figure out the town, you're just passing through. That means it's never answered whether or not the burrowing goblins are citizens, but I'm gonna lean on no. You will need to come back to town a few times, and can always stop back for a reliable heal, but your main goal is to venture north, collect all the flute player's missing items, and be on your way. You'll get lost sometimes, but the fun kind where you're not too bamboozled. The flute player's messengers show up often enough, and you sometimes get a personal visit. It's as simple as that, so we're good to talk about the visuals. Graphically, it is on the low end, especially when it comes to things like character models. It is strange at first when a human being looks like some kind of bug-eyed skinwalker, but it does give it unique, surreal art direction that I think does add to the overall experience. Having beaten it, it's not the kind of thing where I wish they had realistic-looking characters. I usually don't think about that kind of thing, but I do here because the environments are so gorgeous. It gave me the same feeling as playing Morrowind or Shadow of the Colossus for the first time, where you're in this strange, foggy world full of secrets. Though the draw distance is certainly better than Morrowind. I try not to talk about game engines often, because generally in YouTube game reviews, the term "the engine" could be replaced with "the evil spirits" and be just about as accurate. That said, playing the game and especially looking at the settings menu, I would not have guessed this is Unreal 4. It's low fidelity, but doesn't come across as trying to emulate a retro game and failing at it. There are no clashing assets from the marketplace, or just those kinds of hiccups you'd see in a small Unreal game like this. Northern Journey feels like a fully realized world and is good at conveying a lot with very little at times. However, it will use the power it has to give you an incredible sense of scale. Sometimes it is faraway scenery you can never touch, but you can still touch a good amount of it. Looking around wherever you see a rope or a bridge is somewhere you can get to. It's when you unlock the zipline for the ropes that you can really appreciate just how much ground you're covering. So much of what you see is explorable, and it does give you that great sense of discovery. For the most part, these aren't winding mazes of confusion either, but very well thought out levels. You're not let fully off the leash to wander over every hill and get lost and frustrated, but it's still open and branched out enough that it gives you a lot to find. It's so clearly made by someone who loves hiking and exploring, and it's nice to talk about a game like that. I get the sense that this is a man who loves nature, but probably despises insects. Now I could be projecting there because you do face down a lot of bugs, like a Clendathu amount of bugs. And don't get me started on the spiders. This might cure arachnophobia by sheer exposure to spiders. Not just one kind either, but every spider. There are so many. It's to a level that the game actually makes a point of saying from this point forward there will be no more living or air-breathing spiders, after you pass the valley of hybrid troll spider demons. Then the deal is set in stone. Of course. Even in that example, fighting the same general kind of enemy does not feel repetitive. The spiders aren't a color swap, they have different models that can move and fight very differently. There are over 50 different enemy types in the game, and some you only encounter briefly, but a great amount of effort was put into making them visually distinct, even if they are in the same category of flying insect or something like that. A decent amount of them will use camouflage and ambush tactics as well, so look forward to that. As you might expect, the game draws a lot from Nordic folklore as well. You might be familiar with the names of some creatures, but how they get portrayed in game can be pretty wild. Even if you do just fight something more traditional, Northern Journey keeps things refreshing enough that I wanted to keep going. The scenery could change in all kinds of directions, and for most of the game I had the sense that I never knew what was around any corner. The environments are already captivating, and he wanted to give you an extra layer in connecting with it. You interact with the world with your hands, and they're just kind of floating there like a VR game. This felt weird at first, but melted away over time. I felt pulled into the game enough that that kind of missing realism didn't feel like it mattered a lot. If anything, I really liked seeing that extra level of interaction. Sure, out of context, it looks like it must be a VR game or Nordic Rayman, but it's shocking just how much this works in the context of the game. So visually it has grand scale, mystery, and interesting art direction. However, what brings the atmosphere to the next level is the game's sound design, and especially the music. The tracks this game has can be downright haunting. Just the act of entering some new areas will stick with me a long time purely due to the music. Relaxing, enchanting keyboards and vocals, then pulsing electronic club music. Now you might think that could be jarring, but the way the game paces that stuff out, it all fits together. There's a solid variety of tracks, and they all perfectly reflect the areas they were made for. As a bonus, the soundtrack is included with the game as well. Walking around, you'll hear layered sound of the wind through trees and grass, the overpowering rush of water. It's very rich and pleasant, but what's interesting is how harsh it can become. When you're out on a relatively normal hike, it's nice, but when things take a turn for the bad supernatural, sometimes the sound becomes electronically harsher and distorted. It's not restrained by pure realism and authenticity and makes the soundscape really fascinating at times. Putting all this together, the act of just walking around feels so ethereal and otherworldly. It's not all pure ambience candy either, since the combat sounds are also solid. The sling you start off with has unlimited ammo and is viable all game, which is good because landing a hit on this thing gives you a sickening crack. Sometimes it can be crunchy and low fidelity, but the sound feedback is always satisfying, and that's what matters. While the music was tailor-made for the levels, sometimes it plays with the soundscape in interesting ways. For example, there's one area where you need to cross through a bog. And while you're doing this, you're having to fight and push against your movement. There's a creature in the lake trying to serenade you to your doom, and sometimes its calls mix in with the music. It's not a one-time show either, and there are fun callbacks to it when you descend down into its lake. I've played dedicated underwater horror games that were less tense than this lake trip. Good God, the lake trip. Again, it's a happy sad adventure. There are some sounds that are off and not in a surreal way, more just a bad way. There aren't many, but they do stick out harder with how good everything else is. If I had to pick anything, I do wish the zipline didn't sound so harsh. I find it harder to enjoy the scenery when it feels like I'm at the dentist's office. That said, those aren't remotely close to deal breakers. Northern Journey has some of the best atmosphere I've seen in a game, which is an insane accomplishment for a literal one-man band. Now at first glance, someone might think, oh, this is a walking sim. You know now that there's combat, and a lot of it, but when it comes to the actual walking, that was just something I was fine doing on my own. You can sprint, there is no stamina meter, and you can play this game in near Quake-like speeds. There's not fall damage, only falls that kill you. One time while testing this out, I accidentally impacted the village idiot, and my momentum sent him flying into the chasm. Plus, you do want to watch your step regularly, as one of the easiest ways to die is to lose your footing and fall down. This happens way more if you're tearing around like Sonic, but you'd be surprised at how often it can happen even when you're being careful. Sure, there are tons of creatures, but falling is the #1 hazard in this world. As far as the gameplay itself goes, it's simple. You can carry multiple weapons on you, but can select 4 to quickly switch between. The only upgrades are little red vials that permanently upgrade your health by a tick, and orange vials that permanently increase your ammo capacity, and how many emergency health potions you can hold on you. The emergency potions are for use in a bind, otherwise you'll find health vials lying around. You quest for the items, fill out your map, and occasionally unlock shortcuts between previous areas. So it is a bit of a Metroidvania, but more about finding new ways to explore over new combat abilities. Occasionally you'll be blocked off by a wall that demands enemy souls to cross, and they're not too rough. They're mainly a gate to make sure you've explored the area because it is very freeform. You might get a message from the flute player saying, "Don't miss this item, idiot." So the game can try to help you without being cruel, like if you need to backtrack a huge amount for an objective, you'll just be teleported right there. That rarely happens, but it always feels appropriate when it does. A lot of thought was put into keeping the exploring fun over tedious. It's already scary enough. So when it comes to exploring, the game excels. Upgrades might be out of the way or somewhere perilous, but not too obscure. These aren't Halo 2 skulls. It's the combat where things get tricky. You have a solid arsenal of weapons to switch between, and figuring out what to use for a situation is the key to the game. For most of the journey, combat is paced out well, and you have a steady supply of new weapons and enemies to keep things interesting. In these regular encounters, there can be a healthy amount of jank, like enemies phasing through the ground or weird hitboxes, strange animations like bears doing flying spins at you. I don't mind these kinds of things in a game like this, but if you do, that's going to be a big hurdle. I usually didn't mind it because the way combat encounters are paced out and designed are so good. It's not constant, and you usually have time to think about how you approach a fight, but there are still some surprises to keep you on your toes. There are really fun combat set pieces like fighting the explosive troll brigade inside of a valley, or trying to desperately keep pace against a swarm. But while there are great gauntlets to run through, the spongier enemies, and especially the boss fights, can make the combat awkward. Most of your heavy-hitting weapons have slow reloads and don't gel well with these kinds of fights. The faster ones are more meant for swarms, and not very effective in these either. There is a difficulty slider that affects these fights in particular, but it's still not a perfect solution. It's not that the boss fights are horribly challenging or anything, it's just that the system itself doesn't seem meant for them. You're used to scoping out a fight or maybe being ambushed by multiplying ticks in the Swamp of Pain. Then when you find yourself fighting 50 of the Fjord's finest meth heads in the arena, that feels off. Some try to alleviate this effect by giving you a special weapon, like the sheep staff here. It fires bolts while the head slowly melts away. It's a better solution, but not every fight has one. The last stretch of the game especially feels not underdeveloped, but more changed out of obligation. Playing normally, you sometimes find health and ammo as you slowly explore around, but the last bit of the game goes full retro FPS with items everywhere, a multiple stage boss fight, and an awkward game of keep away. Pure combat isn't the strength of the game, so Northern Journey banking on it for its climax just doesn't work for me. These are smaller parts in a much bigger picture, and the game has plenty of challenges that don't involve the combat at all, but these do stack up enough to make it feel more flawed by the end. These aren't fatal flaws, and I was still having a magical journey most of the way through. If you can tolerate that kind of jank, this is an absolutely easy recommend. I told friends about it, I bought people copies, it had been a while since I'd been this captivated by a game. It has satisfying exploration, a good amount of horror, and impeccable atmosphere. The polish is held back by a single guy doing all of this, but that's also the heart of it too. Northern Journey is an extremely cool game. If you enjoyed it, I would highly encourage you to leave a positive review for it on Steam or anywhere else it goes. That helps a ton with visibility, and this is the exact kind of game that deserves it. We need more games like this. Games with funny little goblins that I don't understand. That's really the key. What? Am I considering a Garten of Banban review? Well, it is the end piece of a Five Nights at Freddy's Human Centipede. I just can't tell if it's supposed to be a joke or not. Which hardware store did I work at? Well, fellow Blue Vest spotted the Genesis in the Duskers video, so it was a Lowe's. I think they still use Genesis, and it's terrible software. What's a good game to try completely blind? My top 2 answers are always Outer Wilds and 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. 13 Sentinels might feel like I've pranked you in the first 2 hours or so, but stick with it. Do I consider Prey to be System Shock 3? Wow, that image had some timing. Anyways, I think like most people I wish they just got to call it Neuroshock, it probably would have done better. It's a very good game in that kind of genre, but I think it's missing too many elements to really be a system shock for me. If you haven't played it though, don't let that stop you, it does a ton of great things. I do wish that some of the Moon Crash content could have been sprinkled into the main game later, in like a patch, but what can you do? Anyways, that's all for now. Maybe we'll have something more story heavy next time. Oh, come on.